As men, we are always told bigger is better, and there is no question that having something large to grip between your palm and fingers is a good thing. When it comes to quads, though, bigger isn't necessarily better, and whilst the FPV world has settled on 5 inches being the standard, like I've got here with this Nazgul, 5 inch still is quite large, and for many people, smaller quads may be not only easier to learn with, but better overall. Now, a little while ago, iFlight released this, their latest version of the Nazgul. This is the 5-inch 03 edition, and it is a phenomenal quad. However, iFlight have now released a new F4 edition of this quad, and we're going to take a look at that today. Now, just to quickly show you how this quad arrives and the kind of assembly that is needed. So when you open the lid, you'll find the props on top. You have the props for installing, as well as a couple of spares there as well. Then in the middle, we have the quad held in place in this foam packaging. On the sides, we have a little bag of screws and extras, which is nice to see. We have some screws over here for our GoPro mount, which is pre-installed on the top of the drone already. And then in the middle, you can see the quad is held in place in this foam packaging. Now, the real nice thing about this is that it pretty much comes completely assembled, ready to go. The only thing you need to do is install the props and then fit the O3 antenna on the back. That simply plugs in just like that there, and literally it is as easy to go as that. The only thing you need to do from here is bind it to your specific receiver. The version I've got here is the Express LRS edition. The binding on that is exactly the same as it would be on any other O3 based quad. I'm not going to go through that in this video, but overall, literally it is as simple as connecting the antenna into the correct position, mounting the props, and you're ready to fly. Now, the real nice thing about the way iFlight have been doing these recently is they've been labeling up everything to make it as easy as possible. You've got these little labels on the tops of the motors here. You've got some labels down here. You've got a label down here showing you where to bind the O3 air unit, as well as a label here talking about the receiver and the battery. They really have tried to make it as simple as possible. I'm not going to say it is completely plug and play setup like you get from DJI, but it is as easy as it gets in the FPV world. Just to quickly walk you through the spec, this is the F4X edition. That means it is the X frame rather than the dead cat. It is an O3 based quad, so it comes pre-fitted with the DJI O3 camera, the O3 air unit in the back here, as well as the O3 antenna. That is the standard O3 air unit, is not the Lite or the Ultra like we've seen on their newer Defender 16. Internally, it is pretty much fitted with the same electronic setup as its bigger brother. So we have the Mini F7 flight controller, as well as the Mini E55 4-in-1 ESC, which is up to 55 amp. Now, whilst I've said they're pretty much the same, it's not actually identical. The F5 comes with an E55 stack based on BL Heli S. However, this is fitted with an E55 S stack. This is actually based on either BL Heli 32 or Blue Jay, and mine has come pre-installed with Blue Jay as standard out the factory. This for me really isn't a downside, however, it is something I did want to specifically mention. This is a 6S quad, and it is fitted with the Xing 2205 motors, a bit smaller than like you see on the 5-inch, and that is designed to be used with 4-inch props, and they include some HQ 4x3x3 in the pack as standard. Diagonally, it is 185mm wheelbase, and size-wise, it's 148.5 by 110 by 36 on this X. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 6S quad, and it is designed for batteries a size roughly 1000 mAh to 1400 mAh. Now, just looking at it in a bit more detail around the aircraft, it is very similar to the F5. However, there are also some big differences. Whilst it does have these plastic panels on either side to offer some protection for the internal electronics, rather than being molded plastic, they appear to be 3D printed on this one. You'll also notice that there's no LEDs on this frame either. The original F5 had the LEDs in the base, you had them in the arms there, and you also had them on the sides there. This doesn't have that at all. It's a more out and out quad, and it doesn't have quite as much bling as the F5 did. It does, though, have that same solid front end setup with the aluminium standoffs. We've got the GoPro mount, as I've said, installed as standard, the cable protection there, and overall, they've done a real nice job of putting everything together on this in such a compact platform. Like the F5, the power input connector is up the back here in TPU, again next to the antenna. I would have preferred the angle on that to be a little different. What you do find is your cable is coming over like this and it can press up against the antenna there. I would have preferred it actually if it was angled this way rather than that way. It's not a major thing, but it is just something I wanted to mention. Looking underneath, the receiver on this one now is in a different place. On the original, it's located up here in the front, and you can see they have a little sticker to show you that. Whereas on this one, it's now at the back, right underneath where the ear unit is, and we then got the antenna coming out there into that TPU mount. Weight-wise, this quad comes in at 349 grams, basically ready to fly, props installed. The only things missing at this point is our battery and our SD card. Now, the battery I'm going to be using this with is 1100 milliamp hour 6S packs from CNHL, and if I add one of them on top, total weight then is 558 grams. Now, just to give you an idea of the size difference between these two side by side, you can see it's quite a lot. And I actually personally think 4-inch is the sweet spot for freestyle and standard FPV. 5-inch is great, but it is a big aircraft once you take into account the full wheelbase. If we just pop them like that, you can see that there is a substantial difference. Obviously, my F5 is the dead cat, hence the reason the arms look a little bit different. But overall, it's just a much smaller package, less obtrusive. It'll be less noise in flight as well, most likely, although I haven't actually tried that yet, but we will test that when we get into the air. And really, it's just a better starting point, in my opinion, for new users especially. Now, as I've said, this is a bind and fly drone. It is configured from the factory with Betaflight. You do not need to touch Betaflight on this quad other than checking your RC works correctly once you've bound it. You will need to update the O3 ear unit, and you will most likely need to activate that as well with Assistant 2 for consumer drones. However, I also want to give you a warning in that you should not update the firmware on the Betaflight flight controller. This comes pre-installed with what iFlight recommend is correct. Upgrading Betaflight will cause this quad to lose all of its settings, and it will no longer function as it came from the factory. There is no need to install the latest versions. There is no need to rush out and make changes. And my advice to anyone buying a bind and fly drone from any manufacturer is to leave Betaflight alone unless you specifically know what you're doing. The process for me is very simple. We will bind my remote controller, we will check the functionality of the modes as well as the arming option in the remote controller screen, and that is the only things I will do with regards to Betaflight. Then we will connect it to Assistant 2 for consumer drones with DJI, activate that O3 ear unit, and the quad is ready to go. Now, what we're going to do next is just a quick teardown to have a look at the build of the quad inside. If you can hear any noise, I do have a 3D print on in the background. I do apologise. Please ignore it. Hopefully it won't come across too loud in the audio. Now, I've undone the screws already, so if we lift the lid and pop it to one side, you can see we've got our flight controller, we've got our soft start power, we've got quite a big gap actually up front here. Considering it's a smaller quad, we didn't have that much space in the larger Nazgul, and then we've got our camera. Looking at the flight stack, it is the same one that iFlight use on many of their quads. There's nothing particularly special here. You can see that it is sandwiched in there between the side plastic plates. If you did want to get to it, you're going to need to remove these plastic covers. They're not going to be the easiest thing to remove. They are 3D printed, as I mentioned earlier, but you're going to need to undo the camera plate at the front as well to be able to lift it up, because that is on an angle, and then it should come free, but at the moment it's held in place. Then at the back here, we've got our soft start power input. This is the anti-spark system that iFlight install on their quads. You can see it just sits there on top of the O3 ear unit underneath. And other than that, there's not a lot to see because the receiver, as I said earlier, is now sandwiched under there, whereas before it was sandwiched up front. You don't have all of the other bells and whistles on this one, so we don't have that LED board. You don't have that buzzer as well. We simply have the flight controller and ESC located there, the soft start anti-spark board there, and then the O3 ear unit underneath. Overall, everything looks quite tidy. There really isn't a lot to say other than that. As I've mentioned already, from a repairability point of view, You're going to need to do a bit more of a teardown to get into this if you are going to want to replace that flight stack. So again, you're going to want to remove the front covers, and then that would allow these covers to lift off out the way. But as it is today, it can't just lift them off because it's going to stop it. Now, before we get this quad in the air, we need to do the configuration. Now, I'm not going to walk you through that specifically in this video, but the very basics are you will need to make sure that you do bind your Express LRS receiver to it. The way I always do this is via Wi-Fi. I did need to actually update the firmware. The firmware on the Express LRS receiver was quite old, so I've updated it to match the version on my radio. And then in Betaflight, it's simply a case of making sure that the receiver option works as expected, make sure the modes is correct, lay out my OSD as I want it, and then we're ready to go. Now, I've been testing this quad on and off over the last few weeks. The weather here has been quite frankly horrendous at times. However, I have managed to get enough flight time on this out to share with you some thoughts. What we'll do before I do that, though, is just share with you some in-flight thoughts as I was doing some initial testing. All of the footage you're seeing here was recorded in 4K 60 on the O3 Air unit without stabilisation, and then I have applied some very basic gyroflow stabilisation in post.
Now, the first thing I will say is this is not the quietest quad in the world. Even though it is much smaller than its bigger brother, it does have a bit of a whine to it. More than anything, these flights are just to give you an idea of how the O3 system will look on this. It is windy here today, so I'm going to have to be a little bit careful. Just keeping a bit of height at the moment because there are some birds around, but I'm going to come in low level in a minute. You can probably hear in my mic the DJI goggles pressing on my nose. Overall, actually, the image quality with regards to vibration on O3 is really good on this quad. There are no issues at all that I've seen. It flies actually very well. It's very stable. There is props in view. I'll just show you there. You can see that you can't just see the props in the sides. It's not the Dead Cat, it's the X. So if you did want a version without the props in view, you're going to want to go with the Dead Cat. But it still does make a nice filming quad. And as I have mentioned in my review already, I do think 4-inch is better actually, especially for people learning and people wanting to get into FPV, because it's just a little bit easier to handle overall. Everything is just a little bit smaller. You know, you can get it into tighter places. Obviously, we're not doing that here. I'm going to try and keep up off the deck a little bit, simply because of I have no interest in losing this quad here today. What is good on this quad is I'm running it on 1100 milliamp hour Success packs. I'm just going to head into there. And you do get over 4 minutes flight time on this. I'm not going to head into that valley just because I don't want to risk not getting it out. But you are able to get over 4 minutes flight time on this aircraft. So for a bit of a cruiser, it does very well. Absolutely bird life everywhere down the beach here today. Let's head up over those trees that side. Being attacked by flies. But I don't know how much you could pick up on the microphone, but it certainly does have a bit of volume to it, even on these props. The props I am using are the stock props. I'm not using anything else. It's very smooth actually. The tune for it out the box is fairly decent. We're at 3 minutes and 19 seconds now, 3.6 volts. So we'll push it to 4 minutes. Obviously not aggressive. And now we're getting low battery warning, so let's bring him in. Oh, wind took us up. Let's bring it in and swap packs. Really is windy here today. I'm pointing straight into it and it's just holding me level. Okay, going for flight 2. Just really having a feel for it. It does float, you know, it's not a heavy quad. Didn't do the full loop there. That was just... it's really hard to really do anything here today because it's very windy. I'm in that part of the season for me now where flying becomes very, very challenging. Just feeling... yeah, it's not a fast moving quad in the sense of, you know, if we pump it, float and hang time is fairly long. You know, you've got plenty of time to actually do something about the move that you're into. You haven't got to worry too much. But it does have plenty of power as well. It's got no issues. Certainly pulling out of anything. It's not a quad that is lacking power even in its smaller form factor. I think for me, what this quad is about is a smaller cinematic quad. I think the dead cat of this is a no-brainer. The X isn't bad, you can always crop in on the image, but I think the dead cat, more than anything, is the no-brainer for me that you can use in places that you wouldn't necessarily want to stick a 5-inch. And use it as a really nice at low 3 flying quad for getting some decent footage.
Okay, so to share with you my thoughts on the Nazgul F4 from iFlight. Now, I think this is actually a really nice 4-inch quad. It isn't what I would call an out-and-out bando basher. I think this is a 4-inch cinematic quad, and it does a good job in that category. It flies very well. You get decent flight time with a reasonable sized battery like I've got on it here, and it'll allow you to get some really nice footage from that O3 camera. This quad does get pushed around a little bit though by the wind. You might have seen in my footage that there is still some vibrations making it through in the stabilized footage. It was even hard to get that out with Gyroflow. It has though been fairly windy here. If you are somewhere that is windy, you're probably going to want its big brother. It also isn't the quietest quad in the world. Obviously that's largely down to the motor KV and props. However, it is something that you're going to hear even at a little bit of distance. So if you're flying somewhere where noise is a factor, then you may want to take that into account. With regards to the iFlight bind and fly side of things, I think they do a really nice job on this kind of quad right now. It has a fine balance between ready to fly out the box and needing configuration. The quad is set up, but you do still need to go into Betaflight. You do still need to bind your Express LRS receiver. That process in itself isn't as straightforward as I would personally like. That's nothing to do with iFlight themselves largely. It's just the overall binding process in Express LRS is a little bit more involved than some other systems. Also though, their receiver did not come with the latest firmware. It came with version 2 and all of my radios are on version 3, and as a result of that I did need to upgrade the receiver out the box. It would be great if iFlight was shipping this with a version 3 times rather than version 2, because most people are probably going to be on that by now. It isn't completely plug and play because you do need to configure the modes. You're going to have to get the OSD to how you like it, and there are some little tweaks that you will need to do here and there. But as a quad like this that probably isn't specifically designed for new complete from scratch users out the box, I think they've got the balance right. In the end, if you're looking for a 4-inch quad that comes ready to fly with O3 built in, I see no reason not to consider this one at all, and I really do like what iFlight have done here. Now, price-wise, the Nazgul Evoke F46S HD is available for $499, and that is with the O3 ear unit built in as well. The only thing that you need to add to this quad is your radio transmitter and a set of FPV goggles. You can also get it in other versions. You can get it with Crossfire as well, or you can even get it with 868 or 900 Express LRS 2 if you wanted to go down that road. There are also a few other options that you can get too. You can even add GPS if you wanted to as well, but that does come at an additional cost. So overall, I think it's a nice quad. If you're interested in getting one, there will be a link to it in the description. Now, I hope you have found this video interesting. Please do let me know what you think in the comment section. If you have any questions, please do put them in there and I will try and answer them as well. Finally, I want to say a big thank you to iFlight for sending this one over for us to review. If you're interested in supporting the channel to allow us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking out the links in the description to my Patreon as well as Buy Me a Coffee. It is only through the support of my patrons am I able to keep making content on this channel, and if you'd like to support us to allow us to keep making content like this, but the content that you've seen on the DJI FPV systems or many of the other systems, please do consider supporting us, and the link is down there too. Anyway, that's it from me on this one. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.